Hi guys! This week I thought I'd do something a little bit different for you, both in terms of style and scale. I've got a kind of a neat gladiator figure that I've had laying around for a couple of years that I want to show you. It was provided to me by my friend Barry. He had it sculpted. He just kind of does that. He moonlights in producing figures and just makes things now and then in small runs and sells them. But basically what that means is you probably are not going to be able to get a hold of any of these, so sorry about that. I hope you at least enjoy watching me paint this figure. And this is what it looks like. So you can see this is big, big, big. It's over 30 millimeter here, and the proportions are cartoonish and very exaggerated. As you can see, he's got huge muscles, really long arms. This is clearly something that's more whimsical, more fantasy. It's not quite probably something you want in a really strictly historical setting, but you can see how something like this is just really cool looking. It's really stylish. It's going to be something that you're going to really enjoy painting if you're like me. So that's what I'm going to be doing. It'll be kind of neat to paint all those big kooky muscles and just have some fun with the armor and big choppy swords. This is not a very serious thing, but it's kind of nice because I've wanted to be doing some more fantasy type figures recently, and this is something that kind of goes more in that direction. And there are actually games out there now, as it happens, since this figure was made actually, for kind of 30 millimeter gladiators. Maybe you've heard of Jugula from Gripping Beast. So it is indeed made to play with figures of this scale. So, even if you can't get a hold of these particular figures, maybe I'm hoping you'll get, some inspiration if you do want to do something else with sort of this large scale gladiator combat, which, is definitely a thing you can play. So yeah, that's it. I'm just gonna go ahead and get started, I guess. So first of all, I just want to qualify this video by saying that it's going to be long, not because this is a super complicated figure in terms of the elements involved, but because I want to do a really good job here on blending and shading, because this is quite a large figure and that is important at this scale to really make it shine. So the first step here I'm doing is applying a base coat of Vallejo beige brown. That's darker than my normal skin base coat, but I want him to look a little bit tanner and have a slightly more Mediterranean skin tone. I'm then going to apply a generous but even wash here of Reichland Flesh Shade. See, I'm just trying to get a nice smooth coat as best as I can and not have too much pooling in areas that are not deep recesses. So alright, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different here with how I show you how the skin is painted, because there's so much to do and the skin is really complicated because of this figure scale and all the exaggerated bulging muscles. I want to get a really smooth, subtle job, so I'm going to be applying a lot of layers, doing a lot of steps, and I don't necessarily have anything that I need to say by each layer or step that I go through, so I'm not going to. I'm just going to show you everything I do, and I'm just going to give you some comments down below, sort of little pop-ups to let you know what color I'm applying as I go along, and you can just kind of watch me kind of gradually build up. I will say here that what I'm starting out with is a mixture of the beige brown and some Iraqi sand, which I've used to lighten it slightly, and that's going to be my first general highlight on the flesh. And you can then, and you'll see as I go along how I lighten that up gradually. it should go without saying that all of my paint mixes here are quite thin and quite transparent so that I can build them up. I'm applying a light, thin coat and then working over it in areas where I want the color to be lighter and brighter. And doing that means that it really gives you more shades of paint in actuality than you've actually mixed. You can get more refined layers and more gradual shading by using thin layers. And from about this point, I'm really going to start thinking about the direction that the light is coming from. I mean, I don't do weird things with directional lighting. Normally, I just sort of assume a top-down light source. But once you get past Iraqi sand and start really getting these light shades, you really want to think about where these high highlights are going to be hitting. I'm not doing it in my video because you wouldn't be able to see what I was doing very well, but it's easiest when you're painting these higher highlights to sort of hold the figure and look down on it. And then you can really see where those lighter shades need to be applied by looking down and seeing what areas actually are exposed when you look down, because that's the areas, you know, if a bright light is coming down, where it's going to shine. So I'm really focusing on that more now, really building up the light colors where there should be light and leaving those areas like under his arms and places like that more in the shadows. Now at this point, I felt like some of the shadow areas on the figure were a little bit too stark. Some of those muscle bulges, there was just too much contrast, especially on the areas where a lot of light was hitting. There shouldn't be such a huge difference between the highlights and the shadows is what I had. So I'm toning that down here, not everywhere on the figure, but where I feel it's necessary. And the way I'm doing that is I've made a very thin mixture of the beige brown and the Iraqi sand, and I'm lightly applying it over those shadow areas. Not enough to really fully color that area in, but just to slightly lighten it and tone it down. And you can apply several layers if you need to until you've gotten it as toned down as you want. And then you may want to go back in with some light, just pure Iraqi sand or even white and Iraqi sand to help blend that into your lighter highlighted areas. The very final highlight on the skin is pure white. You should use this very sparingly though. Make sure your white paint is real thin, real transparent. I'm just going to apply it really, really sparingly to get those biggest, most bulgy muscles to really stand out, really look shiny, you know, really you know, increase the whole exaggeration that you've got going on here. It doesn't take much of the white, but if you do it well, it's really important for, you know, getting a really nice final result. Now I'm pretty much satisfied with the skin, so I'm finally going to be moving on to something else, and I want to do some leather areas on this figure first. There's not too much here, at least I didn't paint too much as leather. I just did his sandals and sort of the back part of his belt with leather. So to start out, what I've done is base coated those areas with German camouflage black-brown. I'm then going to follow that up with a kind of overall highlight of chocolate brown. I'm not being too careful here yet, but you want to kind of avoid any sort of recesses or dividing lines between straps or different pieces in the belt or sandals. And you can kind of blend this color out as it kind of disappears into more shaded regions of the figure. For my second highlight on the sandals, I'm going to be applying just some beige brown here, and you can see I'm really using that to start picking out and defining all the little straps, and to apply some highlights in areas where I think light is going to be hitting on those shoes. I've then lightened that beige brown a bit with some Iraqi sand again, and I'm using that to get a nice kind of bright, crisp highlight where I really want to emphasize the edges of different pieces of leather. And like with all leather things, these light colors you should really apply to the edges if you've got a big piece, and then sort of blend inwards. That's going to be mostly the case on the belt. If you want, you can even go back in with just some pure Iraqi sand real lightly, just to finish some areas where you really want some extreme wear, but you want to be real subtle with that. If you're going to do it, don't apply too much of it. Make sure it's in areas that are really light or really worn. Now I've decided to paint sort of the wrappings on his arms and legs just in sort of a basic gray-white tone. Though, again, just to keep color cohesiveness going, I've mixed just a hint of Iraqi sand into all the colors I'm using on these wraps. So I'm starting out here with a base coat of sky gray like I usually use on whites. I'm applying a couple of coats just so I get good enough coverage over that black, and there's just a hint of Iraqi sand in there. You can kind of see it behind me, which makes it a slightly warmer, browner shade. I'm then going to create an intermediate shade by mixing some white into that gray color mixture I already have. And I'm going to start using that to pick out sort of the individual wrappings and strips in that fabric and binding. And as always, I'm going to be focusing the lighter colors, especially more where light is hitting, and avoiding or blending more out into those areas between his legs and such that are going to be in the shadows. I then went ahead and created a mix of white with just a hint of that Iraqi sand in it again to warm it up, and I'm using that as another highlight layer on the white areas. And again, you can see I'm picking out the individual wrappings, trying to focus towards the tops because light's going to hit more the tops of all of those, and then sort of any folds that are sort of facing downward should stay grayer. And again, you can see I'm emphasizing more and more those areas where there's more light hitting the model, and I'm going to be building up because it's white, so it's transparent, and it's going to take multiple layers of this color applied before you've probably got it as light and bright as you're going to want on the figure. You can then follow it up if you want with just some pure white, because that cream color, that very subtle cream color I've got now is fine, but you may want to get it even brighter here and there and really, you know, light up certain parts of these wrappings. After I was done, I decided I wanted to emphasize the brownness a little bit more than I had. So what I did was to take a very, very thin down Agrex Earth Shade Wash and apply it lightly over the bindings so it went down the recesses. And I tried to make it as smooth as I could to avoid pooling. So it just gave it a very slight brownish tint. Once that was dried, I then went back in with just some pure white and cleaned up some of the higher highlight areas, just so that it wouldn't look muddy or, you know, like, you know, just too brown or too dirty. Usually you don't want a wash to be your final step on anything, because it doesn't give a nice, clean, crisp look if you do that. So that's why I'm going back over it again to really emphasize areas that need to be bright and highlighted. Now I'm going to move on to his kind of toga wrap, whatever, which is really cool. I love how it kind of, the shape and the sculpting on this is really neat. Makes it fun to paint. I decided to go with purple here as the color. It's not a very realistic color, I think, for what gladiators should be wearing, but there's nothing realistic about these figures. They're really in the realm of fantasy, so I am not at all concerning myself with making color choices that are believable. I just think purple is pretty, and I think it's especially going to look nice with some of the bronze, brass type things I'm going to be doing later. So what I've got here is a base coat that's Vallejo Royal Purple, and then it's darkened substantially with black. At this point, it's mostly black, in fact, with just a bit of royal purple in there. I'm then just going to create a slightly lighter shade by mixing more royal purple into the black. And what I'm just going to start doing here is really emphasizing all of the tops of the creases and folds, and just avoiding paint down in the really deep recesses. Those can stay nice and dark. And of course, for this first layer, as you'd expect, you want to cover broader areas than you're going to want to do later on as you highlight the purple further. And I'm just moving on doing the same thing, but now I'm using just pure royal purple, layering it over and building up on top of the areas that I want to be brighter and where there's going to be light hitting. It's pretty easy with a surface like this. You really just kind of focus on the tops of folds and the kind of where light is shining, and sort of build it up from there. The next layer is a mixture of royal purple and normal purple from Vallejo, and just continuing to build it up. Then once I have applied that, I'm just going to move on to pure purple by itself, building it up. There's an obvious pattern here, and obviously the higher and brighter my colors get, the more I'm going to really focus them on smaller and smaller areas and tops of the folds, and really focus also more on where light is hitting. So again, looking down from the top of the model, sort of making it brightest there at the top of his shoulder and sort of those areas, and then slightly getting darker as it goes down and kind of curves around his body, basically. I'm going to work in some final really high highlights on the purple, because when you're making this fabric like this, the more extreme contrast you can get, the better. So we start with a really deep, deep, deep base, and we want to get really, really extreme highlights too, but those need to be real subtle and really sparing, so that it doesn't, you know, get washed out and ruin the whole effect. And I'm lightening my purple here now, just using Vallejo Beige. Yellow, that type of shade. When in doubt, and when you're trying to lighten a color, a yellow shade like beige or buff is always a really good choice. White has more of a tendency to wash colors out, make them look pale. Yellow color avoids that a bit. It keeps it warmer and livelier. So that's what I'm doing here, and it's really now quite subtle. I'm really going to apply these colors lightly and only towards the top, and I am going to apply a couple layers. So I'm going to do just with a little bit of beige in, and then one really final super high edge highlight with, it's going to be really really bright. And I should say the color in real life actually looks quite a bit better. It's a much richer, more vibrant, bright purple. The camera, for whatever reason, doesn't really pick it up very well. It gives it a kind of a more grayer, kind of dull cast. So this effect is really quite brilliant and really striking when you actually see it in person. Now, another super duper important focal point of this figure is all of his sort of armor, which I've opted to paint in kind of a bronze gold color. Now, full disclosure here, normally when I'm using or going for golds type shades, I always rely on my trusty Vallejo Air gold paint to make my mixtures, but I'm out of the paint right now. It got dried up or something. I didn't have it. And it was kind of like, uh-oh, what am I gonna do? So instead of using Vallejo Air Gold here, I am using Citadel Gold, I think, or Gold. I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but it's a very, very orange-red shade of gold. But you could use a Vallejo Air Gold just as well. It's a slightly different tone, though, so it'll give you a different effect. But anyway, this base coat that I'm applying here is German Camouflage Black Brown with some Gold mixed into it. Not too much yet. It's a very bright, intense color, so I'm starting out very subtly here, so you get a really kind of brown copper effect. And I'm just going to base coat the knee guard, the patches on his arms, his belt, and of course his helmet. And oh yeah, don't forget the guards on his swords. I'm then just going to start highlighting the gold areas, and I'm going to do that by just mixing gradually more of the Jenna Gold into the German Camouflage Black Brown. And I'm going to try to build it up as slowly and gradually as I can so I can get as many different tones. It can be tricky when you're working with metallics like this because you make different shades, but when you apply them to the model, because of all the shininess and reflectiveness, it can be hard to see, you know, exactly what you've done. But you can see, again, I'm working on areas where I think a lot of light is going to be hitting the metal more and sort of blending it out down into more shaded areas. So this first mix that I apply really has a minimal addition of the gold paint added in, but I'm then going to continue mixing in the gold another couple times, so lightening my color progressively several more times to get a lighter and a lighter effect on these metal areas. And you can really do this as many times as you want. I did not end up using pure Gold because I decided it was just so bright orange red, and I didn't really want that even layered over the brown, so I kind of skipped that instead. And instead of using the pure gold by itself, I took some Vallejo Air steel and I mixed it into a bit of the Gold and just a little bit of the brown to keep it from being quite so red. And I'm now applying that as a very high edge highlight, again blending it outwards. And because I want his armor to be really more of a bronzy type effect and really blingy gold, I'm applying this very, very sparingly to areas where I really expect there to be a lot of light hitting. And I'm keeping my coat real thin and blended out. You're going to see a lot of this obviously on the helmet, particularly because that's up high where, you know, the light's coming down a lot. And I'm just kind of carefully applying that there, just here and there, blending it out. If you want, you can then even take some pure Vallejo Air steel thin, I should say, and you can use it to edge some areas that you really want shine on, but I would be very, very careful about that. I did do it, but I actually ended up having to go back a little bit later and tone it down because I felt like I'd gotten it just a little bit too shiny. It is a nice effect, but you really have to use it in the tiniest amounts or else it's kind of look weird and ruin your effect. Next, I'm going to be painting the blades of his swords. My base coat here is a mixture of German gray with a bit of gunmetal in it just to, you know, get a nice dark metallic shade. I'm then going to highlight further by mixing more of the gunmetal into that initial color. And the way I'm going to be painting these blades is on each side. They have very specific sides to them. So I'm going to highlight some areas more and some areas less, but do it in a very sharp, clean way. So you can see my first highlight is going to go almost everywhere except on the side of the blade in his in his right hand that there's a lot of shadow, so I'm not going to paint one facet of that. And then I'm going to move on to just pure gunmetal, and I'm going to kind of do the same thing, but I'm then going to exclude sort of the next region or any region that it should be in really sort of dark looking way. And then after that, I'm going to move on to putting some Vallejo Air steel into my gunmetal and just kind of continuing the process. Each time I'm kind of excluding one of the specific facets of one of the blades from the highlighting process because it's one where there's just not as much light hitting. And you're going to just end up in the end with your sort of final highest highlight of just pure steel, really only applying it to maybe 2 facets in total, and probably also the top edges of those blades, because you want them to look extra sharp and shiny. That you can see I'm blending it so where there's that little curve at the back of the blade, that's a little bit darker, and it sort of then blends out into a brighter, shinier color. That's just going to give it more dimensionality. It's a little bit hard to explain, I know. I'm probably not doing a good job, but hopefully you can kind of see how I'm doing that, how I'm applying, specific shades of the silver only to specific areas. And you can see, since the cutting surface of those blades are really kind of choppy and rough, you can choose to highlight extra some of the sort of streaky, rough metal edges there, or leave some areas slightly darker. Now really the very last thing I want to do on this figure, just because it's a lot of fun, is to do a bit with washes here, because that's just neat on a more fantasy figure like that, and you can add some interesting depth and kind of richness that complements your color. So I've got some Azurman blue here, and I'm applying it very lightly to my blades, sort of just to give them a very slight blue tint on some of the especially darker sides. I'm then going to take Leviathan purple, and I'm going to use it a bit to shade my bronze brass areas. It's really nice because it'll really help complement the metal, and it will also tie it in really well with his kind of tunic. You can put a stronger color in areas that are shadowed. You can even apply a thin layer to the higher highlight areas, because this bright kind of metal, rich gold metal can really take that. But of course, you don't go too far. You don't want it to get really, really purple. You just want this to be kind of real subtle effect. Okay, so here's my finished fantasy gladiator. I really enjoyed painting him. It took me a really long time though. I probably spent close to 5 hours working on this figure, but that was partially because I just really wanted to do a really good job. I really wanted to take my time and layer a lot, because it just looks better in the end. You get better results. You get a nicer figure when you do that. And also just because at these larger scales, to get it to look good, you have to do that. So you can kind of imagine if it's this much more work for a 30mm-ish figure, which is not a lot bigger, you can kind of guess what it's like with 54mm figures, which is something I have also done in the past. Those figures can be enormously time-consuming. So I get asked sometimes, is it easier to paint bigger scale figures? And the answer is, well, no, not really. The smaller figures are easier because you're omitting steps, you're omitting layers, they're less complicated, there's less detail you have to worry about. Usually the bigger a figure gets, the harder it is to do a good job. So that's something you might want to keep in mind. As I said, I really, really had fun with this. I think it looks great. And I hope, you found it useful. I know I did things a little bit differently here, but maybe this process that I use when I'm really trying to paint skin in a really thorough manner, I hope that, that was kind of useful for you on maybe other more normal figures where you just really want to get a good result. So if you liked this video, please let me know in the comments. Tell me what you thought. Share it, of course, or like it. And you subscribe to my channel too if you have not gotten around to doing so already. So that is all for now, and I will see you next time.